everyone has a smile now and they're really happy. And I'm going to go back to this.
Good morning. I have to confess that when I got the reminder email from Hannah a couple of weeks ago saying, "Oh, you're talking," I knew that I'd signed up to do a Creative Mornings talk, but it was a long time ago. I haven't actually been to a virtual Creative Morning at the point where the pandemic hit. My work just went through the roof and it was just not viable. So I signed up to do a Creative Morning talk pre-pandemic. So I'd completely forgotten what I was supposed to be talking about. So it was a pleasant surprise when I saw that the theme for me to talk about today was being resilient. So I kind of started thinking about, okay, so what am I going to talk about? Well, being a resilient person requires resilience. So I thought, that's kind of where I'll start. I've had in the past people very kindly saying, that I'm kind of like a model of a resilient person, which I found really interesting. And, really, it's really kind of them to say, but it's not really that kind of praise you want, is it? It's a little bit like being asked to make love to the Queen. It's a great honor, but you wouldn't really want to do it. And in lots of ways, being known for being resilient kind of isn't really the best thing to be known for, because it means that you've had a lot of stuff thrown at you. So I was thinking about what I might talk about today and how I might share some of my experiences in my life and how they've influenced my thinking over time. So I guess that the best place for me to start in terms of all of that is just to share with you a little bit about myself. So I was a naughty child. I started at infant school, and I remember my mum being summoned at the end of the first day because I'd pulled the plug out of the water tray in the classroom and flooded the classroom. I didn't do it deliberately. I don't remember precisely how it came to happen, but it was accidental. But it kind of set the path for my whole academic journey through school, that I was exuberant. My wife is a trained educational psychologist. She worked as an ed psych for a few years and then went back into the classroom. So she's a teacher with a specialism in special needs, supporting children with special needs. And she said to me in the past, Paul, if you were going through the education system today, you would have every label going. I come from a family of eccentric people, and there's quite a lot of autistic spectrum within my family. And so I have some interesting traits, and I also definitely have issues to do with attention deficit. So I'm quite clearly ADHD. I struggle to organize myself. I struggle to see risk. And all of those things for me as a child kind of came out in what was seen to be naughty behaviors. So I would be the kid who said what nobody else would say. And I was the kid who, on exiting the classroom, would jump down the stairs or leap over the dustbins or whatever it was that I was doing. Exuberant rather than naughty, but I was absolutely told that I was a naughty child. And to the extent that when I left infant school, my parents sat me down and said, "You're not going up to the juniors with everybody else. We're going to send you to a different school." And they sent me off to Friargate House School, which was a small independent school on Friargate in Derby. And my dad said, and I'll always remember it, my dad said, "You go in there because they've still got the cane and they're going to beat it out of your son." And so off I toddled with my elder brother, who was also going there, but he was going there because he was considered a genius and he wasn't getting enough stretching. I was going because obviously I needed a bit of a slapping around. And I went there for 2 years. So after 2 years, I'd managed to duck and dive and avoid getting hit with a cane. And so I think my parents decided that it was not worth the money. And so they took me out and they left my brother there and they sent me back to the junior school to go and be back with my friends. And that pattern kind of continued all the way through my school life, that most teachers that taught me told me that I would not achieve anything. And if I was only like my brothers, then I would achieve things and I would be successful. But unfortunately, you're not like them, are you, Paul? And that messaging continued right the way through my education until I kind of exited education, having scraped some GCSEs, took A-levels for 5 years. I took them and bummed around, went to the pub, played football, and failed them handsomely, retook them, failed them, retook them again, did a bit of a bricklaying course, and eventually settled on work. And so I worked as a door-to-door mop seller. I worked in a petrol station, extensively worked in a petrol station, and did quite a long stint of bingo calling and the Gala Bingo on the Ring Road. And in that time, in that period, kind of while I was doing A-levels and bumming around, I met this amazing person who became my girlfriend, and she's now my wife. And she was the first person really who believed in me and saw that I was capable of achieving things. And I was capable of achieving things that I didn't believe myself that I was capable of achieving. I'd never learned how to knuckle down and achieve a deadline. I never did homework in school. I never revised for any exam. I was just incapable of doing it. I hadn't learned those skills. And my girlfriend, Alex, one day, and after we've been together a number of years, she said, right, if we're getting married, you need to get a job. And I said, well, I've got a job. I'm a bingo caller. And she said, no, a proper job, because you can work in a petrol station or you can be a bingo caller for the rest of your life. And you can do more than that. So she, at that point, was just training to become a teacher. And she was doing a PGCE at Cambridge University. And I said, well, look, what am I supposed to do? I've got few qualifications and I've got no idea what I want to do other than be a footballer. I'm yet another of those people that you meet in life who, I could have made it. But I've got dainty ankles. So they kept breaking. And that was a very significant contributing factor to me not making it as a footballer. And my wife is gutted that she doesn't have my ankles. But anyway, that's a different story. So I said, what am I supposed to do? And she said, well, look, you've grown up in a large family. You're really good with kids. Why don't you train to be a teacher? And I said, well, I know nothing about teaching. She said, oh, it's fine. She said, I'll help you write your application to university. And she actually wrote my entire application form for me because my handwriting was so appalling. I think I would have been turned away at that point. And I was offered interviews. Derby University turned me down flat. They could see what was really going on. But I got an interview at Nottingham Trent University, and my fiance, by this point, because I was on the way to getting a proper job, she said, right, okay, they're going to interview you. This is what they're going to ask, and this is what you need to say. And she coached me. And so I went in, they asked precisely those things, and I parroted back what I'd been told to say. And I got an unconditional offer, which was amazing, surprising, but amazing. And I started a 4-year teaching degree. And it was the hardest 4 years I've ever had in my life, because I am not a teacher. I'm not a teacher in the mold that teachers exist. I am challenged, as I've talked about, but I'm also kind of irreverent and kind of challenging to authority. And that's not what teachers are supposed to be. Teachers are supposed to be quiet and compliant and do what they're told. And I had a very, very rocky journey in my degree. I scraped a degree. I got a 2-1. No, I didn't. I got a 2-2. Yeah, I got a Desmond. So I got a 2-2. And on the day that I went into university to find out my results, it was in the days when they still put it up on a board, no GDPR back in those days. I stood looking at the board, and my head of year personal tutor, whoever he was, the guy who was significant in my course, stood behind me and he went, "Do you know what the really good thing about this is, Paul?" And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "With a 2-2, you can never darken our doors again." And I said, "Okay, well, I don't really want to come back. But anyway, I'm off. Thank you." I didn't go to my graduation. I knocked a hole in the ceiling instead and started doing some renovations on our new home that my fiance and I had just bought together. And so I qualified as a teacher, and my wife still says it's the biggest achievement of my life. And I would agree with her on that. And I got a job as a newly qualified teacher working in an infant school in Shelton Lock. And on my first morning, I went out to fetch the children in off the playground, and there was a parent who said, "Bloody hell, they let you look after children." And it was a guy that I'd gone to secondary school with. We both played together in a rugby team, and he was surprised to find me as a qualified teacher working with 4-year-olds. So I was working in a reception class. That phase of my life became an interesting phase, because if you talk to the teachers, and I still see some of the teachers from back then, a long time ago now, nearly 20 years ago now, all I said to them was, "This is a mug's game. This is a ridiculous job. I'm not going to keep doing this. This is mad. I'm having to work 50, 60 hours a week." And yet, at the end of my 3rd year in that school, I was made the deputy head. I didn't apply for the job. I applied for an acting assistant head job under duress from the head teacher, and they made me the deputy head. And I was gobsmacked by it, because I didn't mean to become a teacher, and I certainly had no intentions of becoming a senior leader in a school. And there I was after 3 years as the deputy head teacher of the school. And it's quite clear, looking back, that they saw something in me that I just didn't see in myself. But I became the deputy head, and I started to get my feet under the table with that job. And I thought, actually, yeah, there's bits of this I quite like. I quite like being a leader. I quite like being able to set a direction and pursue it. And so in my time as a deputy head, the school moved to become an outstanding school. It's still an outstanding school now, and we did amazing work. It got national recognition, et cetera, et cetera. And then I got bored, because I don't know whether it's my ADHD-ness. Somebody once said to me, it's just because you're entrepreneurial, but I'd had enough. I'd been in the school for 6 years, and I was bored, and I wanted a new challenge. And my wife, as she is now, said, "Oh, you can become a head teacher." And I said, "Well, I don't want to become a head teacher." And she said, "Well, you'll be good at it, and you get a pay rise." So I applied for a headship and was successful, which was great until I kind of got my feet in under the table and looked around and went, "Oh my goodness me, what on earth have I taken on?" Because I took over a school in Derby that was, to all intents and purposes, marvelous, but actually behind the scenes was a complete car crash. It was, when I arrived, it was like the CIA had done a clear out. They'd shredded everything. They'd wiped all the memory sticks. And there was no evidence to justify the incredibly high standards that the school apparently had. And so I said, well, I got all the staff together and I said, right, not on my watch, people, we're not doing this. So my first instruction was stop assessing the children, because you don't know how to do it. My second instruction was go and make the classroom safe, because somebody's going to die if we're not very careful. And it launched an enormous period of what Ofsted called significant turbulence. What the reality of that was I was horrendously bullied for the first 3 years. I didn't really sleep for 3 years. I didn't believe that cold sweats existed. You kind of see it in a film and you think, yeah, right. But actually it does exist. And I would wake up at 2:30 in the morning, 7 days a week, and I would sit bolt upright, completely covered in sweat. And then I would get up, and I would go downstairs, and I would start writing the minuted records of all of the conversations and all of the misdemeanors that had happened in the school day that day as evidence in pursuing certain members of staff who needed to have disciplinary action taken against them, etc., etc. And it was an appalling period of my life. And whenever I hear Spaceman by the Killers now, it takes me immediately back to that period of my life, because I would be up drinking coffee 2:30 in the morning, writing all of this horrible stuff down. And when I'd finished it, I would play Spaceman by the Killers, which is really upbeat, and I would dance around my kitchen in a dressing gown at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning, and then get my shirt and tie on and go to school and open the school building at 6:30 in the morning, and still be there at 6:30 at night, and then come home and work in the evening, and then repeat the whole process. And at that point, I had a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old. And I didn't see them. And I just got my head down and worked to turn that school around. Paid an enormous personal price for it, but it worked. We learned an enormous lot of important lessons, and we replaced the teaching staff, quadrupled standards in 2 years, and scraped a satisfactory judgment. And then 18 months later, Ofsted said, well, sorry, but you can't be an outstanding school because you've improved too quickly. And by that point, I'd resigned. I was serving my notice, and I was exiting the education system to set up a company to build technology that could do the sort of school improvement work that we'd done, helping teachers to become amazing teachers very quickly. And so that's the bit about learning a lot. If I hadn't gone through those experiences, I would never have come to understand what I understand now about the purpose of education and how you support teachers and personalized education for kids. The last time I was paid, my last paycheck was on the 25th of January 2014, and I haven't been paid since. And that's been a challenge. And it's been a challenge for me personally. It's been a challenge for my wife, obviously. It's been a challenge bringing up 2 children in that period of time as well. And so, yeah, there you go. I now find myself as a director of a company that I founded when I never meant to set up a company. I never meant to become a head teacher. I never even meant to become a teacher. I was never supposed to do any of these things. So I guess that's why some people in the past have kindly said, yeah, you're like the most resilient person in the world, Paul. And as I say, it's not great to be known for your resilience, but hopefully I can share in the next few minutes some insights into what keeps me going and how I think about the challenges that I face in my life. So I guess the place to start is what is resilience? What's the dictionary definition? The capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness, the ability of a substance or object to bring back into shape, its elasticity. So to me, there's 2 types of resilience here. There's emotional resilience and there's physical resilience. I thought, what images pop up on Google if you search for resilience? And what popped up was all about people and their emotional resilience. So the ability to withstand great pressure and still thrive, still survive. As you can see, what leaps out at me is darkness. All the images are dark. It's about, being under pressure. It's about there's something out there that's against you and you need to try and resist it. So then I looked into the kind of support materials that are out there on the internet. And this is not a big sweeping survey that I've done. I literally did like 10 minutes. But 7 skills of resilience. Believe in your ability to cope. Stay connected with other people, sources of support. Talk about what you're going through. Help others. Activate positive emotions. Cultivate an attitude of survivorship and seek meaning in your life. Some interesting ideas there. What is resilience for a business person? somebody who overcomes challenges and problems, somebody who stays positive and motivates the team or themselves to keep going, remains organized and focused. Well, yeah, maybe that's why I'm not yet a successful business person. And somebody who responds constructively to problems and criticisms. All this is great. But for me, looking at it when I did this quick trawl, it wasn't that useful. But what I took from it was, when you talk about resilience, the internet focuses on emotional resilience. You go to IKEA and you see the chair being pummeled by the machine. The internet's not interested in that. The internet is interested in emotional resilience, how we cope with the pressures of our life. But then I would challenge that and I would say, what if emotional resilience isn't real? What if it doesn't exist? And I wanted to just show you a quick video to explain my thinking on that. Oh, come on. Why is it not playing? I know, I'll just play it from here.
Okay.
Sorry, I had it set up, you know, you won't believe it. Oh, now we get the app. Anybody interested in garden design? Anyway.
Okay.
So I guess my question is that what resilience is that showing? Is that emotional resilience, or is that physical resilience, or is that both? Because when you watch these nature programs, what always strikes me is the fact that there's a life and death struggle. You know, the cheetah is chasing the gazelle. And once it's all over, you're either eaten or you go back to eating. And it's always struck me that how can an animal fall off a cliff like that, just get up, dust itself off, and go away not worrying about it? How does a gazelle almost get eaten and then go, oh, I survived, I think I'll have some breakfast? What is it about humans that make us different? Why is it that we would stress about the thought of being eaten, or stress about the thought of, well, you know, what if I ever fall off a cliff again, and will I survive, etc., etc.? So does the idea of emotional resilience only exist in humans? And if so, why? And so I dug around on the internet a bit, and I came across a really interesting article that started with this: a person who smiles a lot is either a fool or an American. So goes a Russian saying. And what this article went on to talk about was the fact that happiness is a state of mind, and attitudes to happiness change over time. So there's lots of evidence that says happiness, the idea of happiness in Western society is quite modern. Up until the last few hundred years, people were obliged to be kind of dour and sad. And if they had happy periods in their life, they were supposed to be a bit apologetic for it. And this changed significantly in the 18th century with the Enlightenment, when suddenly people went, do you know what? We can be happy. But that was a double-edged sword. And the double-edged sword was, it's now okay to seek happiness. We deserve to be happy in our lives. But it introduced the idea of saying not being happy or not appearing happy was a problem. And I think that still exists today. And this happiness expectation had very real impacts. So at the time when expectations were going up, so were divorce rates in America. So I expect to be happy in my married life, and I'm not happy, therefore I'm getting divorced. Whereas only a few decades earlier, well, actually, you know, life is tough, and I'm set up for that. Therefore, I'm okay. And I wonder whether we're in a time where we expect happiness, we demand happiness, and therefore when we're not, we need to develop this notion of emotional resilience to respond to it. And if that's the case, what can we do about it? How do we develop the emotional resilience to withstand the fact that life is tough and shit happens to you, excuse my French? So I wanted to just finish by talking about an epiphany that I had. And as with all epiphanies, it came out of the blue. It really wasn't expected. It was in 2019, I think it was. And we were on a family holiday in Menorca. And we hired a car and we drove around different places and we went to this place. So if you know Menorca, this is a well-known place called Calamarel. And it has a tiny little beach and then it has loads of rocks. And the day we went, the beach was a lot busier than this. This is a photo I found on the internet, but there wasn't room on the beach for us really. So we ended up putting our towels down on these rocks over here. Now, because I'm ADHD, I lasted about 3 minutes and then was like, right, I'm up. I can't just sit here. I know I'm going to go for a walk along this headland over here. Who wants to come with me? And the kids were like, no. My wife didn't even reply. So I was like, right, I'm going then. I'm going to go for a walk and I'll wave to you when I'm stood up here on top of the headland. And there's a path that winds its way all the way up here that you can see, and then it up to the headland. So I set off. And this is a photo I took standing on that headland, and my wife and the kids are down here somewhere. And as I walked along the headland, I noticed that there was a definite path, which was a bit bizarre because there was literally nothing there. It was just surrounded by sea on all sides, but there was quite clearly signs of human habitation. And so I kept walking, and it was an incredibly beautiful place, unbelievably beautiful. And I was the only person there. So everybody else lying on the beach, sitting on the rocks, eating ice creams and doing whatever. And I'm there in my flip-flops, wandering along this headland, looking at this amazing place. And I arrived at the end of the headland to a sign that is here. This is a photograph of the sign that I took. That what I'd stumbled upon was a settlement that was 3,600 years old. And there were all the remains of buildings. There were remains of animal kind of store areas where animals were kept safely. And I had this deeply spiritual experience. I'm not a religious person, but it was a really spiritual experience because what I'd stumbled across on was a view into the past that was identical to the way that the past was when those people were living it. So in this photo here, this person at the back who is grinding wheat, presumably to make bread. This is that stone. This is a photograph of that stone in situ that I took, and I couldn't believe that there was just there with a few signs up telling you what it was, a Neolithic experience that is identical to how it was 3,600 years ago. This is an unchanged environment. The rocks haven't changed massively. Everything is the same. And I had a direct connection to the past. And I took a bit of video of this. Now, quite clearly, it's not Spielberg epic, that, but in that time, I had that experience of sitting. I sat for about an hour. After I'd looked around, I sat for about an hour and just connected with the past, with human history. And what I understood that day was that nothing I achieve in my life matters, because I was stood in a place 3,500 years after other people had lived their lives, and I saw with my eyes what they saw with theirs, and I know nothing about them, and I know virtually nothing about my grandparents, and I certainly know nothing about my great-grandparents. So time very quickly erases everything that I am going to achieve in my life. And so that afternoon, having just gone for a walk because I couldn't sit still on a towel, I learned that all that matters in my life is that I love people and that I am loved back. And this is a photo that we took on that holiday, which shows how privileged I am. That, yeah, you know, I've had stuff thrown at me in my life, but I have an amazing family who I love more than anything else in the world, and I know love me, and that makes it okay. So the big question, the grand finale, is my life easier now? No, of course it's not. You know, I still get battered by the challenges of trying to change the world, because that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to improve everybody's lives through education, and education hasn't changed in 150 years, and I'm trying to do it not on my own, but yeah, it's tough. But every time it gets really tough, I do think back to that afternoon where I sat and looked at the sea and connected with everybody who's gone before, and realized that I'm just passing through as well. And it doesn't matter whether I succeed or whether I don't. What matters is that I've got my family, and I should cherish that every day. So there you go. Hopefully that was about 20 minutes. I don't know. I haven't got a timer. It's the first time I've actually gone through this since I wrote it. But thank you for listening.
Oh, Paul, that was absolutely amazing. Talk about the emotional roller coaster. Small fluffies, we've had the lot. That was brilliant. I'm totally with you there.